Toni Morrison wrote this line in Sula that I have not been able to stop thinking about, where Sula is dying and Nell comes to see her and asks if she's lonely. And Sula says yes, but my loneliness is mine. Now your lonely is somebody else's, made by somebody else and handed to you. Ain't that something? A secondhand lonely? And I keep thinking about how most of us are not just walking around with a secondhand lonely. We are walking around with a secondhand self, a secondhand sense of our own value, a secondhand idea of what makes us interesting, what makes us worthy, what makes us worth something in a room. And all of it was made by somebody else and handed to us, and we have been carrying it like it is ours. And I want to talk about what it actually costs to keep doing that and what it looks like to put it down. I'm Sharice. This is Charlie's Toolbox. And today I want to invite you into this episode. Now let's get back to the beginning. Most women are not walking around with their own sense of self. They are walking around with a secondhand one that is created by patriarchy. And I mean that in the most specific way possible. Not as a metaphor, but as a description of how it actually works. Because the way most of us were taught to understand our own value is through proximity, through reflection, through who chooses us and who wants us and who we are standing next to when someone decides we are worth something. And when the external source moves or disappears or stop confirming us, or we don't even experience that source, we do not know what is left. Because we were never really taught to locate the answer in ourselves, because that would undermine patriarchy. We were taught instead to locate it in someone else's face when they look at us. Morrison called it a secondhand lonely. The lonely that was made by somebody else and handed to you. And what I want to extend that to is a secondhand self. A secondhand interesting, a secondhand valuable, a secondhand worthy. All of it made by somebody else and handed to you. And carried so long, you forgot it was never yours to begin with. That is the condition, and that is what we are here to talk about undoing. The whole exchange in Sula is worth sitting with because of what Morrison is actually doing structurally in that scene. Sula is dying. She has lived the most sovereign, interior, self-decorated life of anyone in the book. She has been cast out of her community. She has lost Nell. She is nothing by any conventional measure. And when Nell asks if she's lonely, Sula says yes. But my lonely is mine. And what Morrison is doing is drawing the sharpest possible line between two kinds of life. The life where even your pain belongs to you and was generated by your own choices in your own interior. And the life where your pain and by extension your joy, your value, your sense of self was made by somebody else and handed to you. And you just kind of received it. And Nell is the second kind of woman. She doesn't fully understand what Sula is saying until Sula is already dead. What Ackerman's film, Jean Dielman, and I think that's how you pronounce it, understands about this idea and the reason it remains one of the most uncomfortable films ever made is that it shows you the architecture of a secondhand self from inside a woman who performs the same domestic rituals across 3 days. She's peeling potatoes, making beds, cooking dinner, receiving men, and the film gives every task the exact same camera and the exact same patience. And the whole point is that this woman has organized her existence around other people's needs and schedules and hungers, and she herself is almost incidental. She is incidental to her own days, and the film is not dramatic. It is just a quiet relentlessness. And it is uncomfortable because you recognize the structure of it. You have felt the structure of it. The way a woman can disappear inside a life that was technically built around her, but never was actually built for her. And the thing I keep noticing in the women who are decentering men, who are actually doing it, not as a TikTok caption, but as a lived reorientation, is that the shift is not primarily about men at all. It is about switching the source. It is about moving from a secondhand self to a first person one. And the men piece is just the most visible symptom of a much deeper thing, which is that most of us were taught our whole lives to be interesting by proximity, to be valuable by association, to be worthy because someone worthy wanted us. And the actual work is deciding that none of that was ever the real source. That was the result of patriarchy, and for us to go looking for what is. I want to be honest about where I lived inside this condition for a long time, because I did not grow up with a model of what a first person self looked like for a woman and what that meant practically. I spent years locating my value in whether I was being chosen, whether I was being seen, whether the room I was in reflected something back to me that confirmed I was worth something. And it is a disorienting way to live because the confirmation is always conditional and the source is always external, and you can never hold enough of it at once to feel actually full. You are always one withdrawal away from empty. And the thing about building a platform around women choosing themselves is that you can be very articulate about the condition and still be living inside it. I was writing things about sovereignty and closing the laptop and going looking for confirmation from organizations, for social media numbers, from money and offers. Those were my forms of confirmation. I was writing about dismantling, and I do not think I am the only one who has done that, who has built something real and generous and true while quietly holding herself to a different standard, who was given the full version of the framework away freely while still believing she personally needed more evidence before she could apply it to herself. I'm not the only one who did that, but I am being honest about how I felt about it. The shift for me was not really a clean moment, not really a clean break. It was kind of the moment a book deal landed, and I felt surreal about it in a way. I had to actually sit with it and just not just announce it. I had to understand what it meant. And it meant that I was reading more than I had ever read in years and letting voices in that were building something first person and not by proximity. It was the moment someone publicly credited my work as the thing that moved them to finally write the piece they had been afraid to write. And I had to reckon with that, because you cannot be the person whose work changed someone's creative life and also be someone whose value is still pending external confirmation. Those two things do not coexist, and I had to decide which one was true. There is a specific kind of woman who has made this switch, and if you know her, you know her. Because she does not look like what you think she looks like, and she is not performing for the audience. She is not performing the transition. She's just living differently, and the difference is in the texture of everything she's living. It is in what she reads, not what she says she reads. It is what is actually on her nightstand with the spine cracked open. It is books about women whose interior lives are so vivid and so sovereign that the men in the story are almost incidental. Books where the woman's mind, her own mind, is the whole landscape of the story. It isn't what she watches. She has a list, a real one, the kinds of films where nothing explodes and everything matters, where a woman sits alone in a cafe for 3 minutes and the camera just stays because her face is the whole story. And she does not explain why she loves those films to people who do not already understand. It is in her interest in herself. It is in how she moved. Maybe she packed up and went somewhere new. And when people asked why, she gave them the short answer because the real answer was too interior, too hers to hand across a dinner table to someone who was just making conversation. She moved because she finally understood that the life she wanted required a different geography, not just physically, but internally. It is in her financial life and how she spends and what she builds and who she becomes in relation to money. When she stops using it to manage other people's comfort and start using it to fund her actual freedom. It is in aesthetic. The way she dresses, the way her home feels, the way she walks into a room as someone who has clearly been somewhere internally and arrived somewhere new. And underneath all of it, running like a current through every piece, is this. She stopped deriving her sense of herself from proximity to someone else, from a system. She stopped being interesting because someone interesting wanted her. She stopped being valuable because someone valuable validated her. She stopped being worthy because someone chose her. She became those things because she decided she was. Because she built the evidence herself, because the source moved inside. That is what choosing yourself actually is, when it is not a TikTok caption. That is the ecosystem. That is what this podcast is documenting. And if you are already living inside it, then welcome home. And if you are on your way, then you are closer than you think. The tool I want to name today I call the permission slip. And here is what it actually is underneath the simple language. Most of us are waiting for an external source to confirm that the first person version of ourselves is allowed. And we are waiting for someone to choose us before feeling choosable. We are waiting for the room to validate us before we walk in like we belong. We are waiting for the evidence to be complete before we stop performing the smaller version. And what we are doing is outsourcing the authorship of our own self back to the same system that gave us the secondhand one in the first place. The practice is to stop waiting for the slip and issue your own clearance. And it is embarrassingly simple. And I need you to do it today and not eventually. Just write one sentence that starts with she is and fill it in with the version of yourself you have been waiting for external confirmation to become. And do not put one day anywhere in that sentence. Write her present tense. Write her as already real, because she is already real. She is just waiting for you to stop requiring someone else to sign off before you let her out. So there is one question that I want to leave you with, and I mean this as a real question that I want you to actually sit with, not a rhetorical one. It is this: where in your life are you still running on a secondhand self? Where are you still locating your value in someone else's confirmation? And what would it cost you to move the source? I am going to be sitting with that this week too. And if you want to bring your answer somewhere, the Substack community note on Wednesday is exactly the place for it. If you want to be a part of a community that digests art, film, writing, and culture through the lens of the first person self, women who are doing the work of moving the source inside and want a place to think about it together, then the Substack is where that lives, and the website charliestoolbox.com. That is the full home for everything I am building. The essays, the community, the doctrine, the visuals, the shows, everything is linked there. Before I let you go, I want to talk about myself. I want to talk about what I'm into this week, because this is how every episode ends, and I'm going to keep my promise about that. So, what is on my nightstand right now? I am reading the history of the blues. I am finding out that women often led the charge on blues songs, and so I'm curious about how that came to be. What has been in my ears, I've been listening to masterclass workshops about showing up authentically. I'm interested in how I can show up more of myself instead of being kind of guarded, which is for my protection, but also I would like to allow you all in. What I watched recently that I'm still thinking about is I watched this film called Together. It was a solid concept, but the story beats did not quite work. And so I want to analyze why it didn't land. What I've been eating and drinking that has my complete devotion this week. I've been really into English muffins. I love them toasted with butter, with cheese, with eggs, with jelly. They shift from day to day of what I want on top of them. But that is my obsession, has been my obsession for like over a year. And the aesthetic obsession, the visual thing I keep returning to, whether that is a color, a film, still, a room, an image, whatever has my eye right now, is I've been obsessed with collages on Pinterest. Keep wondering about the story being told and why I am drawn towards certain collages, images, and colors. Like, what about that makes me feel good? And so I'm using Pinterest, using art and imagery to tap into my feelings, and I think that's so exciting. This section is entirely about making your life more beautiful, and I am going to share the beauty in my life. So, finally, this first episode of The Invitation, I am so glad you are here for it. And if this feels like something you want to see more or you feel inspired by, send it to the women in your life who is waiting for clearance to become herself. Drop it in the group chat without context and watch who responds, because the right people will know exactly what this is for. There's going to be new episodes dropped every week. The Substack is where I go deeper, and the link is in the show notes. Come find me. This is The Invitation, and you are officially in.